Hello, welcome to the meeting. I think Jesse will be joining us in a little bit, and hopefully some other people will drop by as well. Today we're going to talk about a number of things. We have an upcoming talk this week to a conference on information theory, and it's a talk called Gibsonian Information. So this is our work on Gibsonian information, especially as contrasted with Shannon information. We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about more research planning and other topics as well. So hopefully if you're watching on YouTube that you're able to engage with our Slack and Discord channels. Our Slack channel is a general lab channel, and we have a lot of different things in that team. I guess you call it a Slack team, but many different channels in there for you to look through. We'll be looking through some of them today. And then the Discord is specifically for critical periods and that type of work. So you'll maybe, we can engage in some discussion in some of these channels offline, and maybe, you can get involved that way. So why don't we go to the Slack review while we're waiting. And here we go. So we have a lot of activity actually this week. A number of things have come up. We've been reviewing papers. We've been making comments. So it's nice activity, robust activity. We start with this paper here. This is the Organoid Cell Atlas. This is in the Brain Organoids channel. So this is something that we don't talk too much about in the meetings, but something that we're interested in longer term. And so this isn't the actual paper. I'm not sure if this is, okay, this is the actual paper. So this is the Organoid Cell Atlas, and this talks about this cell atlas that they want to build, and they show kind of they want to build this for these organoids, which are these cell cultures that they can grow in 3D that mimic the development of different organs in the human body or in other animal bodies. So they're derived from pluripotent stem cells. They can grow them in different shapes, which is the advantage, because development not only takes place with cells and their fates, but also in shapes, and specific shapes. And so they can grow them in a culture, three-dimensional culture, in different shapes like this. And they're very small structures. They're in the order of 30 to 200 micrometers in these examples. So they're not very big, but they do try to mimic organs. So you can see that they're mimicking the development of cell physiology, is in this example with motor neurons. Yeah, you can use these sort of structures for personalized drug testing. You can also implant these structures into patients. This is an organoid being implanted into a lung. So there are a lot of potential uses for this. You can also do things like validation. We can do other types of testing with pharmaceuticals and things like that. So the reason you'd want to build an organoid cell atlas is because it allows people who maybe do specific experiments to have a reference so that they can see sort of what they're aiming for. And so an organoid cell atlas would have a lot of different cell types, and people would be able to go to the atlas and look up, maybe a certain cell type, how to derive it, maybe compare the cells that they've been able to derive with some of the cells in the atlas. This is built on this, so this is the project from the European Union Horizon Project, EUH 2020. So they're going to be establishing the first version of the cell atlas over the coming years. And another thing about these atlases is they facilitate a lot of collaboration. So our involvement with organoids is sort of peripheral. We don't have a wet lab devoted to organoids. We usually get secondary data and analyze that. So we're doing a lot of simulation. We're doing a lot of data science surrounding organoids. but not actually growing organoids. And so this would benefit, I think, us tremendously because it would give us a basis for investigating specific questions where we don't necessarily have the data on our own. So this is another use for an atlas. So they want to build this on an existing type of cell atlas, which looks like this. In case you've not seen one of these cell atlases, in my work with the DevaWorm group, of course, we deal with these types of websites all the time. We have these different data portals that you can go to find secondary data. So we have, this has a lot of data from cell biology. You have 14 million different cells, 75 organs, 1,600 donors, 137 projects, and 290 labs represented. And usually the way this works is that if you're a participating lab, you deposit your data into one of these portals or one of these repositories. You standardize the data, and then everyone in the public can use this atlas as a reference guide. So you can see that they have blood, kidney, bone, liver, brain, lung, pancreas, heart, immune system, skin. So you can see that they have all these systems of the human body in here. And so if we go to kidney, we can see that their kidney collection, and this is a data kidney collection. They don't actually have kidneys in here. You can see that they have these, I guess these are papers or data sets. This is a project, actually. So this project represents, I guess it doesn't represent any one paper. It represents a project that this group is doing, and they give an analysis protocol. They also give a set of data files, and you can use this to find, to do all sorts of things. You can use it to analyze the data, you can use it to validate your experimental work, and so forth. So it's really interesting stuff, and I pull all this up so that we can sort of think a little bit more broadly about, how we might do like biological simulation or work with things like organoids without really having a wet lab. And so, as it turns out, you can do a lot of computational work, you can do a lot of data science, but it requires you to have an investment in the tools, in the proper tools, and in the proper knowledge of how to go about getting the data and finding things in the literature. This is the second paper here, a roadmap for the Human Developmental Cell Atlas. So this is actually the paper that is, this is related to the other paper. And so they have a number of different things in this paper. Again, they're going over this, it's like a hypothetical cell atlas, and they're kind of going over a lot of these different things that are involved in it. So the abstract reads, the Human Developmental Cell Atlas Initiative, which is part of the Human Cell Atlas, aims to create a comprehensive reference map of cells during development. So they want to create a reference map, which means they want to build a map of different cell types, how they're related, how they behave in development. This will be critical to understanding normal organogenesis, which is the formation of organs, the effects of mutations, environmental factors, and infectious agents on human development, and as well as a number of different disorders in life history, which, you have like regenerative medicine, aging, childhood disorders. Those are all related in some way to organogenesis. Here we outline the HDCA initiative and challenges of mapping and modeling human development. So they look at different state-of-the-art technologies, a lot of those being genomic, and they look to create a reference atlas across this developmental trajectory. So they describe early milestones and the use of human stem cell-derived cultures, organoids, and animal models to inform the HDCA. This is a nice paper because it offers a number of different sort of views on development, not only within humans but across species. So this is a figure here, and this part of figure 1. If I can zoom in on this, I guess I can't. But I think you can see it at this scale. These are a number of different model organisms or model systems that we use to characterize development. We have human development, which we can't necessarily always probe directly. We can't say, for example, keep babies in a culture chamber and do experiments on it, or we can't like look at human beings as they age because the time is just too great. So we use a number of model systems to sort of simulate this and to inform our work. So we have, in this case, they have a figure here that includes the fruit fly, Drosophila, zebrafish, frogs, chickens, mice, cell culture, and organoid. And so these last two are model systems that could have human cells in them, but are different from actual humans because we can grow them up more quickly than a human life cycle, and we can interrogate the cell types more directly. So then they have this comparison here. So, okay, people use these model systems all the time in the literature. How do they compare, say, with a human, the human lifespan and human development? So you have all these different criterion, and this is just a rough map. I don't necessarily understand how they've sort of defined some of these terms like recapitulation of human developmental biology. That's a pretty broad term, and I don't know if it's something that, is an easy thing to think about. Like, okay, if I want to study, maybe if I want to study like embryogenesis, would I use a chicken? Would I use a fruit fly? Well, I'd probably use a chicken if I had the choice, or an organoid, but that doesn't model it very well. There are other things like genetic manipulation and single-cell genomics that actually have a more, that some of these model organisms are much better suited for than others. So, for example, the fruit fly is a nice model of genetic manipulation and single-cell genomics. You can learn a lot from fruit flies by looking at their genome. It tells us a lot about development, a lot more than, say, if you look at like the frog, because there's been a lot more work done in fruit flies, there are more reference genomes, etc. So, they're kind of evaluating this for the sort of the newcomer, thinking about ahead to the atlas and what that's going to look like. And, they give an example here of different types of methods. So you have imaging technologies, you have single-cell genomics, which are looking at different tissues and looking at their gene expression profiles and some of their other features. Spatial arrays, which are like recording from different parts of the organism. This could be like neuroscientific methods where you're looking at the brain or recording different sites in the liver where you're actually looking at enzymatic activity or gene expression. And then computational methods, which is what we are more interested in this group, we're applying models to data. And then you have this metadata repository, and then the integration of different models and types of data into a single set of layers that you can then work with to gain insights. And so you can see that there's a lot of mapping that's involved. You have, you can look at tissues at different scales, from cells to the whole tissue, the whole organ. You can map this to a four-dimensional model of space-time. And actually, if you know anything about our DevoWorm group, you know we operate from a five-dimensional model. And then you have these time series trajectories of the data that tell you, this is developmental time, this is this developmental trajectory, how things change in that period. And so there are a lot of different applications for this. There's therapeutic applications. You can build cellular programs. You can look at molecular mechanisms. You can engage in regenerative medicine and tissue engineering. So all those things are possible using these kind of reference atlases. So I think these are very good papers for people who are just we're starting out with organoids or want to know more about organoids. And I would suggest that you go through this channel and look at some of the references. We've collected a lot of references over the past year or so, maybe even a year and a half. And so there's a lot here that you can learn about this model system. So that's a lot on that. Why don't we go to Cognition Futures next? This is a number of different things that Jesse's posted in this channel. We have, let's see, down at the bottom here, I think. Okay, so there are a number of videos in here. First of all, there are these papers that Jesse posted. There's one on putting oneself in the body of others, a pilot study on the efficacy of an embodied virtual reality system to generate self-compassion. This is something we talked about with respect to virtual environments. This is where you put on a headset and you start behaving. You interact with other people or with stimuli in your field of view. You're immersed in this world. You have audio in your ears, and you have potentially something you can touch, and you can map those things to virtual objects. So, and people, of course, run behavioral experiments, and this is one such experiment where they're utilizing what they call the body swap illusion, which is where participants can see themselves from a third perspective in this headset and have the illusion of touching themselves from outside. So they see themselves in this headset, they can touch themselves, they have a reference point of themselves in their ego view, but also like off in the distance. And so this can generate self-compassion, which is something that's hard to measure, but we can use questionnaires, we can use surveys, we can also use virtual environments, virtual reality to simulate the conditions for this to form. And so this is why virtual reality, virtual environments are, really a nice tool to have, especially if you're looking at questions like this, because oftentimes it's very hard to probe these sorts of questions just by using regular stimuli or using just surveys alone. So that's that paper. Then there's this Phenomenology and Cognitive Sciences paper, the Enactivist Big Five Theory. So this is something that we've talked about in terms of embodiment. So this is so the distinguishing feature of enactivist cognitive science is arguably its commitment to non-reductionism. So the guiding theme of this article is that a theoretically mature enactivism is bound to be humanistic in its articulation. So this is our explanatory task is thus to bring forth such an articulation by advancing an enactivist theory of human personality. So this synthesizing core concepts from cognitive science, personality theory, and phenomenological philosophy in order to develop an enactivist Big Five theory. So we've talked about enactivism, of course, with respect to embodiment and things like that. According to EB5T, which is enactivist Big Five theory, personality traits are dispositional tendencies for how we come to optimally grip our distinctively human worlds. Individual differences in personality are therefore reflective of stylistic differences in optimal gripping tendencies between human beings. By gripping, I think they mean like embodiment, or they mean like affordances and things like that. So, because you're gripping an affordance because it's there, that it's enabling your grasp. So I'm not really sure what they mean by gripping, but that's I think it is. So let's see. EP5T affords a non-reductionist understanding of the immanent teleology of autopoietically embodied human mind as a kind of a full-scale optimal gripping process that is achieved along 5 major dimensions of personality. So this is where this Big Five comes in. To the degree that the dimensions are universal, therefore we argue that our theory offers a viable path forward in advancing an activist cognitive science beyond the life of a cell and into the mind of a person. So this is, this draws a lot from autopoiesis. It draws a lot from different other, areas of the enactivist literature, and of course it draws from embodiment as well. So I'm trying to find some information in here about grip. Okay, so we specifically propose and claim that the metaphor of mind as grip more actively conveys the embodied and active and situated aspects of consciousness and cognition. So they're talking about like this grip is a sort of a metaphor for sort of engagement or interactivity they turned to de Young's cybernetic Big Five theory of personality, which we think is able to provide such a model for this grip by articulating an account of human cognitive life along 5 major dimensions of personality functioning. Okay, so this is very much a theoretical argument. They haven't really grounded this too much in experiments like we saw with the last paper, but they do introduce a lot of ideas in this paper. So I think this is, if you're interested in this area, this is a good place. I don't know about to start, but it's definitely something to be exposed to. And so this is another paper here. This is a PsyArchive paper. This is by Adam Saffron and Colin de Jong. This is integrating cybernetic Big Five theory with the free energy principle. So this is Big Five theory again, but this is now integrated with the free energy principle, so it's a different perspective on it. This will appear in a book chapter, it looks like. So this kind of takes on this Big Five theory from a little bit different perspective. It takes it from the cybernetic perspective, and the cybernetic perspective then is characterized by the free energy principle and active inference framework, which is abbreviated FEP-AI. So this is where you have the free energy principle, where you also have active inference. And if you know, we've talked about the free energy principle, and it's a collection of ideas, some of which are very well worked out in terms of the mathematics. Some are, easier to measure than others. So it's a really interesting approach, but I think, it's easy to get bogged down in some of the components of it. So don't worry if you don't fully grasp or understand the components here. Speaking of which, I don't think they use the grasp metaphor here. I think they use a cybernetics metaphor, or at least try to draw from cybernetics in some way. So, of course, cybernetics is control theory, and it allows us to look at psychology in terms of regulation and in terms of feedback and other types of things that are not available with conventional types of analysis. So yeah, this is again, this kind of goes through a lot of the Big Five theory, but from a different perspective. So they kind of go from genes and environment as serving as inputs to the cybernetic model, and then that affects personality traits, and then this affects characteristic adaptations and life outcomes. So that's what they're doing in that paper. And then this is another thing from Adam Saffron's YouTube channel. This is exploring the hard problems of mind and life. So this is an interview on probably a lot of these topics that he's written papers on. So if you're interested in the sort of the world of consciousness, the world of free energy principle, the world of applying cybernetics to the mind, this is a good thing to look at. So I don't think we have too much in some of these other channels. I know that we got some things in Ethics, Society, and Tech. Okay, so starting off maybe about at September 4th. So I think we talked about the U.S. Congress program last week. Then you have Joanna Bryson, who wrote a blog post, Transparency is Not Binary. So this is a blog post on the limits of transparency. So this is about sort of the transparency of data, the transparency of technology. And so this kind of goes through this set of topics. If you're interested. There's also this AI Policy Conference, which is a 2-day interactive event. This is, I think, something based out of Europe. The second AI Policy Conference, it's online, but they're based out of Europe. They're based out of ETH Zurich. So this is their Center for Law and Economics. And so this is maybe a place that we might look towards submitting some work or at least attending. I don't know if people in the Ethics Society and Tech Group are interested in presenting here. I know that, say, Angela has some interest in this, and Jesse, so maybe we can make something happen on that front. There's some confirmed speakers here. A lot of stuff on the future of work, ethics. This is Joanna Bryson. Future of science and technology. Yeah, so it's a pretty diverse group of people. Law and technology. Yeah, so if you're interested in that, check that out. And then this is Stella Biderman, who is a person that was originally encountered by Jesse and Avery at Princeton Vision. This is AI ethics person, so their specialty is AI ethics. And let's take a look at that. So they're working as the leader of Eleuther AI, an online distributed research group, student in the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, working with a community of hackers and data scientists, working to educate the world on the use and abuse of artificial intelligence. And so this is just if you want to check this website out. There's some GitHub repos here. So Jesse just wanted to point us to this person to see what they're up to. And that's that section. I don't think we have anything in any of these channels. I know we have some things in the general channel. And so the general channel, we had, this is from last week, this stuff. But this is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit here. This is this Beacon AI conference that we're going to be presenting at on Monday. And this is the Gibsonian Information talk. I'll go over the slides for that a little bit later, and just so we know what's going to be presented. And it'll be recorded and put on the YouTube channel. But this broader workshop or conference, I think it's a workshop. It's really, I didn't really understand how this was all structured, so we'll kind of go through this in a little bit. But this is a nice session on biologically inspired computing architectures or cognitive architectures. So this is what BICA stands for. And I mean, I remember getting involved with or hearing about BICA's architectures about 15 years ago. And so they've developed a lot since then, but it does seem like it's a very interesting area of, you know, confluence of agents and cognitive modeling and other types of things. So there should be a lot of interesting talks. And if there's a particularly interesting talk, I'll probably report on it next week. Our talk, I think, is a good fit for this. So hopefully this is a fruitful session. So I have the Zoom link here. I think if you were interested in attending, I think you can just join the Zoom link. The schedule is here, and we'll go over that in a little bit. There's also this here. This is a book. This is Computational Cognitive Science. So this is a book on theoretical modeling for cognitive science and psychology that was made available. And so there are all these. This is a table of contents here. You know, so there are a lot of different things here for building models and understanding how those relate back to cognition. So there's an introduction with conceptual foundations, mathematical concepts and notation. There's this formalizing section which talks about different types of sort of formalizing your model. Then there's this section on simulating. So simulating in Scala, which is a programming language, simulating with Scala and MathLib, which is another set of languages, specifications, and then the subset choice and coherence, which are other attributes of modeling. So this is where you're looking at modeling in the cognitive domain of decision making. So this gives you this subset choice and decision making, and it allows you to work through a problem quite directly. So, you know, you kind of think about the problem, you think about the phenomenon, you go through and you say, how do you apply this model, this conceptual model to the real world, to people actually making decisions, and then how do you model that? And then these are advanced topics like Bayesian models, agent-based simulations, self-organization, and evolution. And so this is focused mainly on psychology, but I think if you're really broadly interested in modeling, you'll find this very useful. So so there are a number of people involved in this, and so you'll want to check out this resource. Okay, well, that's something that Jesse wanted to point out to me, but I didn't want to go over it right now. So I don't think there's anything in this channel. MetaBrain models. This is something that's been submitted last week. Our MetaBrain models paper. We have the open chat forum here, which is where Jesse wanted to point to this color scheme for the lab. So if you're interested in our color scheme, this is our color scheme. We have a number of different colors that you can choose from. This is for Synthetic Daisy's blog here. This is the color scheme. This is the color scheme for DevoWorm, for OpenWorm, and DevoZoo, which are all components of the DevoWorm project or the DevoWorm group. And then these are the color schemes for the lab more generally. So we have a number of different types of colors. So we have like blue, but we have different shades of blue, and we have a hex code for each of those. So if you're doing any sort of graphic design, you want to create recreate the logo or design a web page, these are the kinds of things you need to do. Or these are this is the set of tools you need to sort of get the colors right, so that it's all uniform. Speaking of which, I think Jesse's working on a logo for design purposes. And then this is a paper by Johan John. This is the In Defense of Placeholders. He was working on a set of blog posts about representation. So this is actually a third post in this series, I believe. So this is a post that, well, let's go over that in a minute. I think we already did that. So why don't we just go over this really quickly. So this is In Defense of Placeholders, a case of representation. This is, I think, the third post in this series. I'm not sure. But it talks about representation. It talks about how if you're sort of have a theoretical default for thinking about the brain being the seat of perception, intelligence, and voluntary behavior, then you have to think about things in terms of representations. But neuroscience has a lot of anti-representationalist thinking. These people claim the brain does not represent anything at all, and that there are other ways to explain how the brain contributes to perception, thought, and behavior. So this is like, I think we've talked about some of this. I'm not sure if this is the same introduction, but it kind of goes through a lot about neural representations, and I think we've talked about a lot of these issues previously in prior meetings, but it does go through a lot of what it means to have a neural representation, or what a representation actually is. And it turns out it's not just a word we can throw around, although people do. It's a word that needs a little bit more rigorous definition. So, you can see a representation, for example, in the anatomy. You can use different parts of the neuroanatomy to sort of define your representation. Or it can be completely mental. It can be something that is generated by the brain in its processing of information. It could be memories, it could be things like that. But the thing to point out here is that the history of this is much more uncertain than we like to think it is. I mean, when you talk about representations, there's a very rich history here, and it has a lot of links to consciousness, because you have, for example, the phantom limb problem, where you have a representation of your body in your brain, and you're referencing it every time you move around the environment or every time you're aware of yourself. And if you have one of your limbs removed, you'll still feel that that limb is there. So you can have what they call the phantom limb effect, which is if you, people who have a limb that's removed, or sometimes in virtual reality, you can train people to have a third limb, like a third arm. And then you can take that away, and they'll still feel for an indeterminate amount of time, they'll still feel the third arm. They'll still sort of make that association with that part of the body that's no longer there. So, you get this bodily representation in the brain that's built, and you can manipulate this representation in different ways, and then take the parts away and see how that changes over time. So it's really picking up or coupling with information from the world. So as you interact with the world, you're picking up information not only about the world, but about your body. And those things are being put into this representation. And if it's changed, of course, then it takes some time to adapt to that. Or sometimes there's a residual effect. And so that's the kind of thing that I think is really exciting about representation. Maybe a way to test the idea of representation. But again, it's a very broad term. It has a lot of potential definitions, and it really depends on what you want to talk about. In our MetaBrains model paper, for example, we talk about representation very generically. We talk about it as having different degrees of complexity, different degrees of specificity. And so I think that's another way to think about it is, how specific is your representation? Are you representing, like things with words or with symbols, or is it more general where you have like patterns or shapes, or is it just nothing where you're just learning, you have a model that learns things and then that's the representation, but it's not really anything that you can put your arms around. It's just that it's there, almost as like an epiphenomenon. So there are all these ways of thinking of representation. I will say that our MetaBrains approach is probably in need of more specific work in terms of nailing down what a representation is. But I think, for what we have, our paper that we have, I think it's perfectly fine to go with some of these sort of, the way we've approached representation. I think it's fine. But I think we need to think more deeply about how to define representation, especially with different levels of representation. So I think that's a very good discussion by Johan to be read. And I'd like to see someone maybe tackle this a little bit more head on and maybe come up with some different, maybe some subtopics, maybe some review articles on representation. Maybe we can explore this a little bit more and refine our ideas about what a representation is. Because I think we tend to think of it in this group maybe as something related to AI. I know a lot of people in this group have encountered representations as a AI phenomena, but I also think, there are other ways, like, when you're working with virtual environments, you're working a lot of times with representations of the mind, in the mind of the body and of different objects in the world. With virtual reality, you can manipulate those objects. You can manipulate the body, you can manipulate the objects, the relationship of the objects in the environment to the perceptual system and so forth. So it makes for a really interesting way to sort of validate some of these definitions of representation, and it actually makes for a way to sort of you introduce something that you're not necessarily going to get in an AI system, which is to manipulate the conditions in a real brain and see how it behaves. We can do things with agents. We can get agents to behave in an environment. We can change the environment. We can control a lot of things with agents. But the AI part, or the actual perceptual part, how the brain actually works, we can't really probe that. So, having a VR system is kind of like the best of both worlds. You can manipulate the environment as if you were, working with agents, but you also have a real biological brain to see the changes in. And so that might give us some really interesting insights into what what a representation is, what it should look like, and then, maybe applying this to the metabrain models work, where we think about the different levels of representation and we say, okay, we have different levels of representation. We have, a representation free layer, we have a representation moderate layer, we have a layer of rich representation. What are those things? How do they relate to one another? How can we tweak them so that, maybe we have the optimal mix of representation in each layer? And maybe, there are things that cross-cut layers of representation. So maybe, it's not something that is like cut and dry for different problems. Like, I don't use a representation free layer for one set of problems and a representation rich layer for other sets of problems. Maybe you have to use all of those in different degrees for, a certain problem. And so the thing that comes to mind, again, is this phantom limb idea, where you have a bodily representation that is both sort of representation free and really does rely heavily on representation. So, some of this, the representation of the body is something that you use as a reference point. But you also don't really need to have a representation of the body if you're just interacting with the environment, say, through sight. So you can do things like in VR, for example, you can put on a headset and you can see a three-dimensional world around you. You can become quite immersed in it just visually, but you don't need a representation of the body to interact with it. On the other hand, you may need, if you have a VR system that has, say, touch controllers and you're manipulating things in the virtual environment, you may need to have a very specific representation of the body to interact with that world. So there are all sorts of, different ways in which you're interacting with the world that require different levels of representation, and they really do cross-cut a lot of it. So I think that there's a lot to do. Like, I haven't really been able to express my thoughts on this recently, but I think this is one way, one research topic I think that's really interesting with respect to representation is kind of playing around with representations, both sort of breaking them down into layers, figuring out what does it mean to be representation free, or what does it mean to be have a very strong representation. Are those things adaptive? I think a lot of the brain representations, especially if you go into the literature on like the phantom, not only the phantom limb, but like on populations of people who have gone blind really early in life, and so they're able to use their other senses more effectively, more acutely. That's related to cortical rewiring that occurs, and so that representation, those representations that they build of the sensory world are far different than the representations you'll find in sighted people who have had sight. They have a mix of sight and auditory perception and haptic and proprioception. They use all those things together. In blind people, and people who have lost their sight really early, they don't have any basis for a visual representation at all. And so they use their other senses to fill in the gaps. And I think that's another area that might be very interesting. Say, for example, if we created agents that had, say, maybe 5 sensory systems, and we'd be very general about this because we don't want to be too specific to the human case or to animal cases, but let's say they have 5 different modes of interacting with the world. And they're sort of, we create an agent like a Brainberg vehicle that's hardwired to these 5 different modalities. And then we allow for, if we take one away, if we take a mode of interaction away, we can rewire their internal circuitry so that it compensates for this. And so when we do that, then we can look at how that compensates, how that representation changes. So, we can do this with agents, we can do this with human brains. It's not a, but it's a very interesting question because it does define the ground rules of a representation. Hello, Jesse. How are you?
Hey, I'm very sorry for being late. My connection wasn't happening, and I was like, blah, blah, blah. So I'm here, but I'm sorry for being late.
Well, that's okay. I was just going through the Slack and having some intense discussion with myself about trying to convince myself of representations. Whether they
exist. Going over Johan stuff?
Yeah, I was actually looking at that. And I think, when I put this recording up, if you look at I'll send out the link to the time, but I think there's some really interesting questions we can ask with representations with respect to like virtual environments, with respect to agents that are, really, because one of the things I noticed about Johann's work is he's talking about the definition of a representation, but it's like at the end of the day, it's like it's still pretty muddled what we actually mean by that. I think one way around that is to like, use like agents and use like, you know, VR or like human experimentation to sort of manipulate or control the environment in certain ways that, force you to use different mental faculties, taking away channels, adding information, and it kind of gets you, it kind of like forces things with the representation if it exists. So for the brain to handle information, how does it handle it? It has to use some set of, mechanisms, some set of representations. Maybe there's if there's no such thing as representation, we can find that out too. So.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. I don't know if you're still going on that, because I have some ideas about that. But
Oh yeah, please share.
well, I haven't gotten into all of his stuff yet, so I don't want to speak about that. But one of my thoughts about representations has been, I suspect, and I wonder. If I can pull up his thing. Could you maybe put that link in the chat for a moment?
Yeah, let me
Have
get
it available. I think I also have it. Okay.
There you go.
Is that we're looking at both all? There's a few things that he posted, but which one
Well,
is
this is the in defense of placeholders.
Yeah. Okay. Because I'm trying to figure out what was his kind of conclusion about this piece. I know like he kind of says, oh, at the end is sort of, he has not made a clear meaningfulness of representation.
Yeah, I think that's the conclusion, is we don't really know.
Well, so I don't really, this is not well-formed thoughts about things, but I feel like representation in some ways is akin to I think the concept of representation may be one of those things that I don't really have the right analogy for this, but it's something. It as a concept, I feel like it could be not necessarily primitive in and of itself, but the way that we are going about it, given what we know and how we're able to understand our current functioning, as sort of just like, I think we could be extremely off the mark about it, in that it's sort of like we're misinterpreting a shadow from a three-dimensional object as a two-dimensional thing, or like the the Carl Sagan tesseract. What's an example of a shadow in a 4D space, in a 3D object kind of a thing, like the hypercube versus the cube. I kind of feel like it's something like that.
Yeah.
Because I think in one sense we're trying to use a concept that's not really well defined, and like, it's kind of ironic because it's ironic in the moment of the lab, in that we just posted something about Gibsonian information, and there's all these different ways of looking at this concept, and it's sort of like, I feel like there's just something that's fundamentally not really, the approach isn't quite right, and it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if that's because actually would love to bring in a friend here, but I can't. But like, I think it was Charlotte's work about exploring some parts of consciousness and stuff, which I don't know, but I was like telling a friend about it. Um, I feel like it's there's just something that's not really. There's something that just feels wrong about the approach to it in general, and not wrong as in like there's like order of magnitude difference feelings about it, and I don't know what that is. I mean, this is like a giant. This is like a major thing. I think it's actually in one way I think like the representation issue is sort of like one of the biggest things in quote unquote cognitive science or psychology or whatever we want to call this stuff, or neuroscience, brain stuff. It's sort of like this biggest question level. Like it's a high level question. And as long as I've known Johan, he's been looking at it from different ways about, what is complexity and looking at the Grossberg book again. And a lot of his efforts in this come out. And so for him, probably one of the people I most respect about this topic to kind of come to that conclusion is like, I don't think it's silly or wrong or necessarily even I just my intuition about this problem is that there's sort of there's a non-complete the problem itself I don't think frames the actual. I feel like, in one sense, the question is a bit of a fool's errand, but I don't mean it in a dismissive way. I just think there's something that is being fundamentally not grasped in a lot of the discussion about it, and it could just be that the framing or the scope or the way it's connected to other things isn't there. Like it's sort of like. It could be extremely anthropomorphized, is one thing that I think about in that sense. Like, it could be way too, like, when you say representation, when you say symbol, when you say idea, like, that's super fundamental to how we think, even if we don't define it. Like, that's extremely, like, you go back to the foundations of, like, Aristotle and ideas and ideals and Western stuff, and this is embedded in how a lot of our stuff has been, but I also feel like that's potentially a tell that what we're trying to do at a fundamental level is not. I don't know. I think you could almost. The other way I could think about saying things is sort of like. The approach is sort of a it's almost like a mental, it's like a path dependency byproduct, but more like maybe like an exhaust, like the way that's very easy for us to think about it and to try to grasp it and use it may be. It may be wrong simply because we want to be able to say that this representation is so bad and prove it, and it's like it just might not really work that way. So I've not really said anything constructive about it here, but I feel like I'm just diving into a situation. It's like I walk into a room with philosophers. I have no idea what they just said. Oh, representation. Oh, yeah, I don't know. And I say, hey, I don't know either, but here's the ways that I don't know about it. How about that? That's what I just did. But there you go.
Yeah, I think that's, it's interesting. There is, in the MetaBrain models paper, there is the section in the development subsection where we talk about the flatland analogy and how it's sort of like what you're talking about with the getting a shadow from a two-dimensional object. So, like, the idea is that over time, you sort of build dimensionality in your representation. It's sort of similar to that, where you have, like, we're looking at one aspect of a representation, whereas maybe it's much richer, and we're not, like, detecting what it is, or we're not putting the pieces together right. Yeah. I think that's something we might be able to explore with metabrain models. If we pose the question a little bit differently, and we've been thinking about it, I think metabrain models is actually very consistent with that sort of being able to sort of say something really interesting about that.
I hope so, because I think I'll have to go back and see what you were saying about the VR testing stuff, because that's obviously, a cool thing related to this that I'm interested in too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, so that's good. Well, yeah, we can talk about that later and maybe next week too. But yeah, this is good. I think we're almost done with the. Let me share my screen again. I think we're almost done with the Slack review. Don't think there's anything much more. We have, I think there wasn't much this week. Research questions, there wasn't really anything raised there. And virtual reality didn't really have it. That's the article again from the self-compassion work. So that's another thing. Yeah, so again, we can use VR to look at questions that we couldn't look at, say, in a typical behavioral setting, but there are also these links between VR and agent-based systems that are, we could use both to answer some really interesting questions. We can also actually, look at like virtual stuff with agents, like putting agents in a virtual world, which seems a little weird because they're already in a virtual world, but there is this thing, this aspect of like training an agent in like a world that is sort of, we try to make it naturalistic, and then training it in something that is maybe like a cartoon
world. Actually is, if I'm understanding things correctly, it's not so much about agents, but the concept of that, and I'm not remembering this correctly, but essentially the concept of what you just said is somewhat analogous to a major AI researcher's effort into trying to deal with causality or explainability in AI. Because I don't know if you know this or talked about it before, so, but I just found out, but basically they're creating a model, or a model, like a neural network in a space for it. And they're trying to have that model connect to another known space of basically another neural network. Was it a neural network or just another thing? They're basically trying to create a space where one extremely defined neural network, one extremely defined neural network is used to sort of interact with another, and in the process of doing so, because it creates like how do I explain this? It basically is designed to kind of trigger some embedded explanations in the first one, so that when the second one engages it and tries to work its voodoo magic black box stuff, it has certain things that are triggered. It's sort of like creating two. I don't know how to explain it better than that right now.
Yeah.
You said. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a paper this week. I don't know if I have it in the queue, but it was on training a model it was like an AI to view things upside down. Like it's like when people stand upside down on their head and they see the world in that way. Everything's upside down, inverted. Can you train can you train a model on the world right side up and then have it interpret the world upside down, or vice versa? That maybe that's similar to what you're thinking, but I think with VR, that's what I'm thinking as well. Like you have this world where it could be a cartoon world, it could be some distortion that you introduce. Can there be generalization? Can you train a model in different ways that like kind of reveal that representation that's building?
This reminded me of something I was going to say in a previous discussion now, and maybe that VR would be so like. Again, I'm kind of stating the soldiers of Avery here, and some other people who looked at. But one thing that I'm convinced of, and this is I don't know how to explain this in proper academic terms, but I've studied people a very long time. I've studied a lot of personality theories for quite a long time, and I've studied things that are like pseudo-scientific or proto-scientific and just all these different things. And I think one of the difficulties that's sort of adjacent to what we're saying is that there's a hold on for like 15 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. There's an extremely complicated thing when it comes to humans. I don't think we don't like one of the let's put it this way. I'll start my approach to this from probably cognitive science in general. Is that when we talk about humans or models, we refer to the human mind as monolithic, basically. We really don't. I mean, there's like abnormal psychology, to study flaws. There's things like that. But so much of our approach is that all human minds work the same way. And I believe that's true to an extent. And personally, my intuition and my convictions are that the cutoff point between where that generalization happens and where it isn't true anymore is huge. And if anything can come from VR and working really well with neuroscience, and maybe cognitive science, is understanding that space. Because, yes, absolutely, I'm not trying to say that you're an alien compared to me, or anybody else, But even a little bit, like, there's some more formal stuff coming into it. This is actually roundabout patting myself on the back for trying to include some neurodivergent talk in the cognitive science trajectories that we've had. I think that's a really important thing. It's like, what is neurodivergence? Yes, sure. And I'm not trying to be, I really mean in a very functional way, not just in like people who have atypical minds are important, special too. But much more like, neurodivergence is one way to talk about it. Or diversity, perhaps I should say, neurodiversity. But even beyond that, to me, there's this, like, the best language I have for it is not academic or scientific, and I am hesitant to talk about it that way, but it's some of the things that Avery mentioned about, like, some of the work on personality that they're interested in, and I've tried to do, and its relation to allostatic roles, or proclivities, or tendencies, or like there's stuff. to an extent, the human mind and the human embodiment of whatever is uniform across all things, all people, all species, all members of the species, yes. But the thing about humans is that there is very, 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 very deep divisions among members of its own species in terms of its very approach to, let's say, representations. Because when certain groups or types of people are approaching certain topics, what sticks out to them and what most heavily is weighted in their severity or their processing of things, or you know, like some people are really bent on logical consistency in things. Some people are really bent on these are hopelessly vague generalizations. Some people are quite bent on immediately apparent things and sort of a kind of functionality that goes with it. And I don't think those aren't so fundamental that someone couldn't differentiate, you know. What is the significance of these differences? It's not that one type of human being is unable to run or speak, you know. It's not at that level, but at a very high level, there's some words for it are sort of like information processing and psychological upsidedness. And what essentially what those terms mean, and I'm not going to go into them here at the time or whatever, but like there is a biasness that is not uniform in how information and or even maybe relation to representations of ourselves and our own minds work. And I think so much of what we try to do is kind of ignorant of that. And necessarily, I'm not saying it's an easy thing. There's a reason some things are limited to being proto or pre or pseudo-scientific. And a lot of it's because we don't have, like, go back to the that quote. I forget where it comes from, but it's sort of like, the quote of scientific progress follows the pattern of like a new technique or device or way of interpreting information. New information is gathered, and then new content models are built. And I think we don't have a technique or instrument or way of getting information about some of this stuff yet. We don't have it. We don't have a reliable model system of doing it. So maybe in that sense, VR, with some really proper coordination of a much more developed cognitive science and neuroscience, could offer that by creating a stable, the biggest thing about human minds, even the little representation, even the little of the individual differences that I was talking about, is that we have no way. Like when I say representation, it's easy to say, when I say orange, you think, okay, there's a color, there's a fruit, right? You have these ideas, and I can say to you, all right, I'm pretty sure my mind thing is thinking about this same thing, right? And let's coordinate our assumptions and have no real grounding about them. But let's coordinate our assumptions and try to talk about them and go from there. And it's like, all right, it's a very low fidelity connection about it. But if you could create a comprehensive embodiment, visual, full spectrum thing, like essentially if you could create a mental structure and then make the mental structure essentially objective, is basically what I'm getting at. Because if you could put my mind in space to observe this mental structure, or looking through it as some kind of a lens, and your mind, then it's like, okay, that structure in some capacity is this objective. And again, like I don't really see that as a big solution, but it's just like from a device standpoint, this makes you think about the concept of development and how the talk I gave again back there about development, it needs certain, what are the methodological limitations of studying development. I think this is a major methodological limitation of studying representations. And a lot of the higher level, many of the higher level and high-hanging fruit, or just difficult to grasp things in this area, like, we don't have the tools for it. And that's kind of why, like, part of why I'm such a big fan of our colleague AJ is that I think a lot of what they're doing, once they have time and the means to do it, could be laying inroads to the means by which to study those things. Because what we have right now is just not there. And it goes back to my original point, like, there feels to be like there's some stuff that's just orders of magnitude different and very out of place and very unaware. Like, I think in one light in the future it could be very, like, the sense of, wow, through the 21st century, humans were really extremely, like, they had no chance of understanding this stuff at the level of what it could be, because it's just, we don't have it. And I just feel like that's, that's my intuition about it. But in a very concrete sense, there appears to be, there's a gap. My main points here are there's a gap between every human acts the same and every human doesn't act the same. And that's a huge gap. And how to study that gap is difficult. I think we are, and some really important work on making some part of the internal mental inner world view, fray, whatever we want to call the internal state, making some of that objective or at least somewhat transferable, and having sort of like it's almost like a reverse microscope, where, like, you have the microscope's in looking into our minds, but the external part is like the, I don't know, VR environment. I don't know. But just some ways you kind of get some comparisons that are more, and not even objective. When I say objective, I don't even mean like true. I just mean there's no way currently to really convey what I mean in some really important ways. Like, we have language is, filling up for us.
Yeah.
But like, that's not, I cannot communicate.
Right. Well, yeah, I think actually it's interesting. The CGS models might actually come into play here, because the CGS models were building like these sort of universal representations. I mean, they basically account for, like, the physical space and then the cultural space, and then you have cultural differences that you're modeling. And the idea is, you could specify different cultural attributes where, it builds a representation based on, like, the way you see the world, the way you represent the world with language or with categories or things like that. And so that's going to have an effect on your representation. And then to see that the differences in those representations, I think that's one way, and we don't really apply it that way, but that's one way it could be used. So yeah, I think, like, cultural and individual differences are very key to representations, and getting around that diversity is like, you don't have to get around the diversity, it's just a matter of accounting for the diversity, having, instead of, like, thinking about it as like, well, it's very different. It's like, well, there's this, this universe. It's almost like we're building a, I don't want to be cheesy about this, but we're building like a UMAP or a TSNE model of, the data. We're just like different point clouds of different, representational types that we observe. So, I mean, I think making it universal is kind of like projecting it to that space, where you have, like, all possible representations of like the physical world. If we view, like, our world, we view like the ambient light or the conditions of like different objects in the environment. We classify them in different ways, represent them in different ways. We extract different meanings out of them or things out of them. What does that world look? What are the totality of all those different representational variants look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like we can't, it even goes back to like that part of that has the same flavor of like this basic average regulator theorem and how well it can be modeled, and we can't do that. And I think hopefully the advances we're talking about here could lead to that. So,
yeah.
But I think that's definitely, and I'm not an expert, but in a lot of ways I do feel that's a major frontier in the frontier map sense. That's a giant, quite unassailable peak, really. And I don't know if it's going to be. And again, a throwback, a nod to A-Rate. I think it would require some coordination across many fronts to even try to scale, as opposed to just, hey, I have an idea. I think a lot of our sort of one-dimensional ideas about how this stuff works is not. I don't think there's just one silver bullet that's sort of a concept. I think it's a orchestration of concepts. At different levels, accounting for, yes, the base. This actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Meta Brain Project itself right now. Like you have a base, and the base is that stable unit, and that's the foundation of a lot of what we know, and it's embodied, and it has this sort of stable base unit that involves a certain kind of regulation. But on top of that, there's a tremendous amount of diversity in the upper layer, and like to me this is way beyond like the thinking fast and slow stuff. Like that's a really nice generalization about different systems, but I feel like that's sort of, I think thinking fast and slow isn't entirely on the mark for what I'm getting at, but also just like extremely, the very foundation of trying to differentiate some of these things, like the initial splits in non-uniformities. Like, yes, there's a base, a uniform monolithic base of human existence, and then yes, some things, like there could be representations that are probably in the thinking fast and the thinking slow. It's a watch this too, but and much more for me. It's like, oh, I just broke part of my desk. That's really awful. Let me see if I can salvage the situation, because I don't know if I can right now. Like part of the screw just fell off.
Oh.
The thing supporting the desk tray.
Uh-oh.
So I'm holding my desk tray right now. I think I this way. Okay. First one. Okay, well, I'm gonna move this to salvage this. Anyway, I've completely derailed my train of thought in there.
Well, why don't we move on to, this is a great conversation. Why don't we move on to some other things, and then we can, we can continue this in the Slack and other places. I think it's a great conversation because I think there's a lot there that we really, need to follow up on. I think the idea of maybe this can be, we could create a paper or something. I think this is definitely it advances the idea of representations quite a bit. So let's follow up on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did want to go through some of the stuff that we talked about in Slack with respect to the website and other things. So I have a couple things here. I think one thing I mentioned to Jesse was that you have this NSF grant and you want to maybe report on some of the aspects of it. And one way that they do this in GSOC is to have these different blog posts. Like this is my knock from the Diva1 group. This was his GSOC project for this last summer. So you see that he has these blog posts where he has a report for every week. And this was required by the program. But like I think, maybe like quarterly reports or other things to kind of gauge one's experience, where you just kind of put like a recording of the work that you've done or things that you've learned. Another like thing that might be a thing we might look at is like looking at professional development posts where you post on maybe some professional development topic where you explore some concept that other people would find useful, like I don't want to say representation, but like people, non-traditional students, for example, and getting involved in research. We talked about that, where that's something that's a challenge. We want to know, maybe someone wants to know how to like kind of be represented in research as a non-traditional student. It's something that's useful to a broader audience, and then maybe you have a post there, and you don't have to do it in a blog. You can do it like just with like sections of a page. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what I was actually getting at with that. I didn't make myself very clear when I was talking about it, but I was like wanted to kind of go over some of the options more concretely.
Yeah, that's definitely what I had in mind. And I think what I'm gonna have some updates on that on my own page for sure. I think one question is, how would you like to? What should I put on the lab's website about this, basically?
Okay, yeah. That's the other thing. Let me share my screen again. So
yeah, I'm gonna go like once I think I stabilized my desk. I'm using my keychain of house keys to screw it in this thing that popped out. I think it's working mostly, but I'll go through like all the website updates like that. If we have time, I would love to do that.
Okay.
With you live. So
yeah. Let me go. So the thing I said, this is the main website here, just so people know where we are with this. So if you're not if you're watching on YouTube and you don't even know about this would be a good place to go for like the clearinghouse of everything. So I've been doing a little bit of reordering. I have like these little menus that drop down, and I have like categories like simulating biology. I don't have the stuff on the organoids in here, but I would like to actually make a page on that soon. And Neuro AI, which is the representational brains and phenotypes cognition futures, that's kind of thrown into that category. And nice because we've done a lot of stuff with that sort of converging on that. There's some other things here that are not really in a category, but and then people get involved. Now the get involved link here off of people and collaboration. This is where we might do this. So this is where I've linked the thing that Jesse made so far. This is where we have this page. This is from our group GitHub repo. This is the description here of some of the projects. We're kind of building this as we go along. So this is the project descriptions. I need to update this. So current members and alumni. Okay, so that goes back to that link. Get involved. So we have research opportunities. So this is nice. I like the way this is all shaping up.
And like, am I still here?
Yes, you're here.
I just hit something that I don't know what I hit. Okay. So I made a lot of these changes over this weekend, or over this week. A lot of them went live and are visible now. So, like, the news section is the updated. I kind of threw together, I updated the description on the top of the page, and there's a lot of new things there that need some review. So I don't know. I would kind of just go through different parts of it, and I can show you too. Like, the cool thing about the GitHub thing is that anybody that we can access to can make updates. So it's a little bit awkward. Like, you need some guidance, but you can update it at any time.
So this is the GitHub IO. If you go to the URL group GitHub and you go to GitHub IO, this is where you can contribute. Like, I would issue a pull request, like on the, I don't know where, is it Markdown files that we're using here?
Predominantly they're all Markdown files. Yeah.
Okay.
Let me. I actually can just share my screen and go from there.
Okay, let me go back. All right.
Let us get. Let me share my stuff here. All right. Yeah, and there's your stuff and then my stuff. I've been doing sort of, combined a base a lot of this thing. Can I even finish this? Let me check this. Oh, they didn't go through yet. Or did they? Hold on. One set moment. Okay, alright. Alright, I will now proceed. Sure. Yes. Oh, that didn't go yet.
Well, I see your screen. No, I don't, actually. Yeah, I think I did. I saw myself, but that's your screen. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Alright, good enough. Great, so now you can see this?
Yes.
So, let's go back out to this. Yes, this is our oral group GitHub. As you may recall, any repo on GitHub, or any account, I should say, you can make an account-based GitHub-based site or a project. But you can, I have the same thing with my own page here. This is my personal version of this. Whoops. But it's quite similar. Like, it's apparent at this here, and it's my own site. And, hey, the template's quite similar, so go figure. But just so you know, that's where we're at. And then there's the main homepage that I think Bradley was showing a few moments ago, which is our main. This is the traditional orthogonal main page. And what I've tried to do is put everything in one space. So it's kind of like a sitemap or landing page. And here are the different sections. Some recent additions. I'll go through all the details about how to do stuff, so you can make changes yourself and not just be me or anything. But also, I want to raise some questions to think about before I do that, so maybe we can make changes as they come up or whatever. I've added pretty much every project site that I could think of here, including some new ones. Like, Developmental AI is not a site yet. But what I've done in that case is I've just made a Notion page on my own Notion at the time. And we can switch this out. Like, there's a whole question to be had about what do you want to do about Notion. Because I think it'd be really great for certain things, or like even transitioning websites. If we don't have a major thing, just have it push some stuff in Notion because it's super easy to adjust, and it won't give us. The URL will be not wonderful, but like it's functional. Like, it will stay stable and it's secure. It's easy to adjust. Yeah. To point out, for the time being, these are housed in my Notion, like my username here, or we can like update to the oral one, or however we want to do that. This discussion that we had. But I made two placeholder things so far. This one and then the open science, because there are a number of things here. Like I'm kind of using this as basically a top nav and trying not to go down deep in the weeds. But like we could have a whole section here, and on this open science, there's a number of things here. Some of them seem a bit dusty and not functional right now. Some of them are. This is the Rockwire community, which is a big thing. That, and I put that for the time being here. But like, in the meantime, again, I made an open science page on my Notion, and I put as many of those links as I could here. I just copy pasted links basically. And what we want to do with this space is a bit open discussion. I'm not trying to force things in this way. It's just for the moment I put them this way to kind of try to at least give a site map in a somewhat comprehensible view. And again, I don't know if the data reuse initiative should be here or not, or if it should be about the lab. Like the position of things is not absolute by any means.
Well, yeah, I think with this, like, so if you go back to the main website,
yes.
Yeah, okay, so the people collaboration tab, that has like projects where we have sites, and then we also, so some of the things we talk about don't have like links here. This is something that we could use a Notion page for to summarize, because we don't really, it's not really a project, it's not really a, so we can't point to anything specific, but we might have like developmental AI is something that is actually maybe part of the neuro AI, but isn't like, we don't have a project page for it, but we do want to highlight things. So that would be a place for that, is the Notion page. And then we can link to it in different ways. Maybe put a link in here, but also have it in the site, that the GitHub IO thing that you're building.
Yeah, and like one of the questions is like, I don't want to replace this what we have here.
Right.
But also part of the impetus for this redesign layout stuff is there's not really a central location to see everything, and I think this layout's a little bit clearer than these are kind of both similar things. I don't know if this is similar or not. This is the same type of thing as this is, but there are different levels of like. There are a lot of apples and oranges, sort of, or maybe not, and it's not clear what they are. But in this view, like in this sort of functional view, these are all basically the same thing. These are all specific project-based whatevers.
Yeah.
And so that's part of where that comes from. But also, someone is just like coming to the lab. There's no context or structure about it. Here's some things here. So that's part of that. And yeah, like I would be very content with like the old page links to for the time being this Notion canvas blank page, and we're both linking to the same thing, and it points there. Like I really don't want it to be duplicity. That's no. And one thing also just to mention, like I copied a lot of these things over from my page, even though they don't quite fit my original use of this layout.
Right.
And I think I'm very content with like having the team, the main like for the ethics and society team. I'm very content with that being either a Notion or just here. Like I'm not going to be having updates on my own page too. I'm trying to.
Right.
Eventually, this link. This is back to my page. This link will lead to the one in the oral universe. Whether that's the good or not. So just point that out. But yeah. So before we go into the nuts and bolts of how to update things. I think I covered most of my questions. I think I'm really not sure what. Like, there's some stuff here in the engagement publication and open science. Open science kind of makes sense, but for engagement and publications, how you'd like to, like, I see what you mean about like Google Summer Code and having you know, like the names links and stuff like that, like having a coherent
Yeah. Well, this is something I need to go through too, and I have been trying to keep it updated, but it's hard to have the, as things change, especially, it's hard to get to get it right. So I need to go through this at some point and fix. I did give you permissions for the Weebly site. I don't know if you got that in your email, but you're now an editor for that. If you can log into Weebly or get the invitation, okay. So you can do modifications to it as well. But yeah, why don't we go over how to put things contribute to through GitHub? How do you do that?
So the theme is great, but it's a little bit non-intuitive, and most things, I'll show you the most important things. There are basically a few different sections. One, there's this whole thing, this whole left nav is probably doing the most. We can, I kind of, just to point out elements of the theme and of what we're doing. This is the index page, and this is all just done by here. You have this left nav. This nav here is this stuff is in a specific location. This pop-up, but this here from all the way down here is its own chunk of stuff, and I believe that is that is in data and navigation YML. So this left nav here is in data YML. I'll get back to that one in a second. There's two different categories of things, and they don't need to be, but the way I've originally built this out, they are. Like, there's the about page, which I believe is only on. No, it's visible everywhere. There's a top tab feature. I don't know. I've tried to avoid using that. I kind of want to do one thing. You can put whatever you want. You can make a link of any kind here, and also up here too. But this is just sort of a separate. It's just a different way of making it this way.
Right.
Versus, like, compared to what I've done for the ethics team.
Right.
And all of these, there's a lot of customization in the actual URL class. But so to go back to our main thing, we'll start with the left nav, which is data navigation. Yes, and it's quite simple. You can figure it out pretty easily. Don't kind of let this don't top part. There's some. I've left these here for the time being. They're not that explained, and I'm going to put more comments in explaining. But basically, here's the custom sidebar, and it's under the docs. what is this docs thing here? It's hard to explain. But for functional purposes, it's very simple. You can just use the exact same format. The spacing matters. Don't make it has to be this. It has to look different. There can't be. If you do this, it's going to be wrong. It won't work. And so on. It has the spacing is set. But it's a very simple format of the title. You have a macro title, like our team and positions. Is here. This looks like underneath it. You put a title. You do children and then title open science, and it's very simple to make changes here. Comment is something out, and it's this place. Any questions about that or about this?
Not about that. What about the main page? Where is that located, or how do you get to that? Yeah, that part.
The front page, that's the index page. So that's just right here on this part. And this is basically what it looks like. There's some front matter here, like this is sort of theme related stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some things here that it's a little bit. I may put a title field back in here, but for the time being, I'm just using it like this. This is definitely. We can go through. We don't do this now, or we can do it now, or we can do it later. But I'll go through all the new stuff, and because this is not curated the way it should be, right?
Right. Well, we can do that later, and I think the dates are a little bit like specific. Like we could do like by month. I think that would be sufficient. Yeah. But also like just to have like I think the lab news is we don't need to put everything that we do. We just have like big milestones if we're pick a diversity of things so that people know what we're doing.
Yeah, this is essentially directly copied from my personal update, so it's not really big for lab. There's many publications that happen in there. So let's index, and the only other major thing to do is like there are some things in the config that are. I would caution against using the config because there's a lot of detailed stuff in here. But if you want to, like, for this author stuff, if you want to change, like, we could create a different bio because I believe the bio is like part of what shows up in the metadata. It's kind of like the description stuff. Or where did it actually go? Here, the description. That's what I mean. Like this is what will show up in a Google search basically. And there's some nice things here, but change the description here. I put your email as the email. There's not like there currently isn't an active email us here. That will be sent to you. But I just put you there in case you can change the search and the description there. This is a lot of the nitty-gritty about, I made the default class for pages to be wide in general, because I think it was more functional, and a lot of like in-depth stuff about the presentation layout is here. So plenty a lot of updates to that. Mostly the index will be a major thing, and also these are essentially the same thing. But these are like the default pages, and these are pages. But just to explain the docs part, also obviously assets are like where you put your images for things. You can put images there like any other thing and reference them. Docs is kind of what I have copied from the original theme and just kept as it were. And the docs are sort of they are what these other pages currently are. As in, get involved is still join. Like this is our baby obsolete, research page, and it's still join here just to explain to explain why it says that, like good form, it's the permalink. Like if you go to the raw stuff, you say you can make that here, make it join, so it will just show up as join here and not docs. So take that out here. And the other ways to get around that, yes, but like for the time being, this is how it works. Navigation. And so these are sort of, the docs are sort of, I'm basically as specific pages that we made, and speaking as a carryover for my thing, this is obsolete. I don't have this link anywhere. I'll probably delete this page altogether from this. CV is probably also a carryover for my thing. The ethics thing is currently the ethics teams page. So docs, for the time being, if you want to make a page like for developmental AI or something, I would put it in here basically. I basically, I would basically just copy the whole address from here. It's basically just copying this stuff up here because if you don't have this front matter sort of header stuff here, things won't look quite right. And just to explain, the layout is single, like it's in column page, basically, plastic wide. Author profile is sort of author profile and the sidebar docs left map stuff. That's all the left, everything on the left side of the page. The permalink is the URL stuff, and the title is basically the H1 that starts off the page. So it's pretty simple, but just so you know what that is. But yeah, I would basically copy this and make a new page in this area, and then you have to go back. There's not it is a little bit tedious. You have to go back and add that to. You have to add that. It won't show up in the sidebar until you add it to this. And you can actually make several different sidebars if you want to go into it deeply, but that probably won't happen on us. Just there's a lot of ability with development, that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it for that.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. And so if people want to contribute, you can either fork the repo that is on the ORL site, or you can just issue a pull request. And if we get a pull request, we will go through and make sure that all those checks are there. So if you modify the header, for example, by mistake, or we can reject that change and accept everything else and then pull it in. And so we can do this, like we can make sure that these standards are upheld, and we can accept. I mean, I don't know, you don't need to, I don't think everyone needs to contribute, but I think if people have something they want to put on, or if they want to change some information about their project, then that's a place we can do it. So yeah, I think this is good. Thank you for that update, Jesse. We'll come back to this next week too.
And I'm kind of running out of time, and my only other thing would be like, do you have any thoughts about where you want to put our sort of open positions, like roles or like new intern kind of things on our websites anywhere? Like, I don't know, where would you like to host those things?
I think you had, the Get Involved link, you have that, and that goes to the descriptions. So I will put the, actually I have that on the front page. I don't know if that's the right link. I'll check it. So I'll just update that after the meeting, and we'll think about it a little bit more and see where that should go. Yeah, that one. But that doesn't go directly to the Get Involved. I'll change that.
What I'm considering also is like, one thing about what I mentioned is like, this needs a good washing and updating for sure.
Yeah.
I may incorporate a Notion page with this just because it will be a lot easier to house some of the specific descriptions. but I'm not really sure yet, and I don't know if you have a preference about that. Do you have a like for the time being, like this is a filling page that's on my Notion. Do you want me to use a different Notion setup than this, or is this okay?
I think I have permissions for that myself, so that's okay.
Yeah, I'll give you new permissions because this is a different site than the old one.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that would be good.
But yeah, it will be hosted on the my name Notion site.
Okay, well, yeah, send me that permission and we'll do that.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
I don't kind of go soon, so I don't know what to talk about.
Well, yeah, thank you for that update, Jesse, and that's something we'll follow up on, and we'll keep working on it, and hopefully we can get some people involved. We can advertise it, and all that. So that's good stuff. Let me share my screen. I know we're late, and I'm going to go over. We started at like 10 after the hour, so we're going to go over about 15 minutes or so. And if you have to leave, Jesse, it's fine. But I wanted to go over the Gibsonian information stuff. So this is the I found out about this earlier this week, so I had to put together a presentation for this. This is going to be Monday, and it actually starts tomorrow. And this is the Information for Biologically Inspired Computing Architectures conference workshop. It's part of this IS4SI, which is an information studies, information science group, and it's a group of conferences. And this is the BICA conference, which is the Biologically Inspired Computing Architectures. So this is an old idea that I think they originally started from DARPA, and they funded some work on BICA like 15 years ago, and it's continued on in this form. So there are events on Sunday, there are events on Monday, and I think Wednesday and Thursday. This is the Zoom link here, and I put it in the Slack so people can go to the Zoom link if they want to join in. Monday is where we are. We're at, I don't really, this is weird because this timing is, I can't quite get the hang of this timing. I think this is the right time. It's either, like, it would either be 11:45 Eastern time in North America, or it's like 2:40 Eastern time. So I don't know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the thing early, see where they are, and kind of catch up. But this is our presentation here, and the authors aren't right. There should also be parent and limb, but that's I think they're modifying this page because there are a lot of inconsistencies. But this is the talk, Gibsonian Information, Monday, and so this is the talk right here. So I put this together. What was that?
I didn't see some of the people who will be at the conference, like Roman Yampolsky and Joshua Bach are there, and that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there are a lot of interesting names, a lot of interesting conversations I think that'll be going on here.
A lot of quirky, weird, and interesting things are going to be talked about at this event.
Yeah, this is great. Like there's this, I think there's something like the failure of deep learning or something. I don't remember where that is, but physical structure derived phenomena as a basis for biological intelligence. Levels of intelligence for artificial and biological systems. This is on Wednesday. This would be very interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of good stuff here. But this is our presentation, the Gibsonian Information. I put this together from a collection of different slides that we've presented on this topic. This is like the different GIFs that I like to use to illustrate movement and direct perception. These are the authors here. So this is comparing Shannon and Gibson information. Shannon information is variety. There's an equation. You're sampling a binary channel with noise. There's encoding and decoding. With Gibsonian information, motion provides the information. It's direct perception. You have this is kind of the math I was working out on this. There's a time-dependent channel where there's, variety, but it's like all over the environment. It's spatiotemporally dependent. There's an encoding. This is actually a distribution. This is an exponential distribution, a Poisson distribution, which looks at the arrival time of the information. And then there's this internal communication channel, which is this Poisson distribution with some lag or some temporal distortion. And so then there's a decoding. And there's also noise, but we don't talk about that so much. And so this goes through this. You can modify the equation to be multiplicative. And then there's this highly patterned input. It's a noise-free internal representation. So this is an internal representation here, this internal communication channel. And there are expected patterns in this external communication channel, and it results in a minimally noisy internal communication channel. Then there's some comparison between Gibsonian and Shannon information. There are parallels here, parallel measures as well. So we can propose measures like from Hmax, we can look at MoveMax, we can look at MoveMin, we can look at flow rate capacity instead of channel capacity, things like that. And then Gibsonian information is about extracting information directly from the environment, or direct perception. And so then we go through the direct multimodal information at different points, the flow motion and contrast, disjoint distributions, time series structure, which I don't know why this slide isn't in here. Oh, it's here. Okay, so this is where you get into the disjoint distribution, comparing with Shannon information, time series structure with these movies that are cut in different ways, and then this leads to contingent action, and then maximum versus minimum coherent movement, which is this flock of, or the school of fish, and you can calculate that for agents versus the whole, and you can distinguish that from the random motion of particles in this GIF. And so then we get into this 4-channel embodiment, which we talked about in, I think, the EI workshop talk, where we have the 4 sensory channels. Each channel captures information from the environment in a specific modality. And you're following this rabbit, and you have the 4 channels, and they kind of move like this. There's this motion, the idea here. And then this either, leads from like direct perception in one direction, or inferred perception, which is, it's interesting because that could be either just indirect perception from different cues in the environment, or it could be an internal representation at work that's sort of filling in the gaps. So like you have forward motion, which is visual, that's direct perception. Haptic, you're not touching the rabbit, but you can sense that it's moving forward. That's maybe based on a representation or these cues of hopping. You have proprioceptive, you have shift left, and again, this is indirect. And then birds chirping, maybe in the back, so you're kind of putting that in the context of nature. And then that's your 4-channel embodiment. And then you have an example here of doing this. This is a different example of someone moving a virtual object. And this is a whole different set of interactions with the different channels. Now you have rotational momentum and no auditory cues. And so then there's this final slide, which summarizes Shannon versus Gibsonian information in the context of these agents that are exploring an environment. It's an ecological approach to navigation. So it's a spatial cognition thing where they're encountering the environment at different rotations, and they're moving through the environment. So and then thank you for your attention. And this is one of our slides where we kind of tease things at the end. So that's the talk, and it's supposed to be like 15 to 20 minutes. So any comments on that?
No, it looks great. I am going to try to go. I haven't looked at any of the other events that are going on, but I don't think it's going to be a release thing. It starts Sunday, and we're on Monday. How does it go to Tuesday, or?
Oh, I think it goes to Thursday. I'm not sure about the final schedule, but I think
we can maybe try to write up something about the event, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
But no, I think the slide stuff. Thank you very much for pretty much putting all that together, and things are pretty quick turnaround time. Like, hey, you're accepted. Like, go do this stuff now.
Yeah, I was wondering about it. I don't think I got the actual acceptance email, but I did get like planning emails, and I'm like, wait a minute, we're in this. So I was like, okay,
hey.
Yeah.
You're on. Hey, you're going Monday. It's like that's like you get nothing. It's hey Monday. Yeah.
But see, this is the advantage of having like slide decks, like having like presenting at different places. So if we want to do a presentation right quick, we can put the slides together and say this is our story, and we've got this.
I know. It's cool because like if people have been following along with us, or just because I've been here for a while, it's like I remember when that first thing came up in a presentation. You see the remix, and now it's like okay, that now it's combined with that. That's always a cool feeling. Thing to say. Okay. No, I think it's great. I'll try to look over it again if there's anything that I would, maybe make sure you emphasize this or whatever. But on the whole, it's pretty good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so that's good, and that'll be recorded on YouTube and put up on the channel. So if you can't make the talk, you'll be able to see the talk, and then we'll probably review some of the other stuff from the conference next week. So hopefully, it'll be a good event. I don't know if it's going to be recorded. Maybe, hopefully, that would be nice because it would be some of these are really cool names. I don't know what it's just a shame to have like. The Zoom thing, and it's in the ether afterwards. But
do you know what is at the start of the page for the program? Yes, there's a PDF missing link.
Yeah,
they don't have that yet. What's the APC? Like, is that like a keynote there? Like, what is the Joshua box?
Oh, this is another session that they have, like APC, and then this is APC Bika. So the Bika starts on Monday. It's all these different conferences that are sort of tied together. So I think there's like a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, I see. And there's the ABC Bika. Yeah. Okay.
So the timing's a little weird on this, but like it's because it's a different set of sessions. Or this is our link for the talks, Bika talks. So
that is not easy to grasp.
No,
at all. So it looks like APC day is Sunday,
right?
Tomorrow, and then Bika stuff starts Monday, and then Tuesday is totally nondescript.
There's some workshop, I think. Wednesday is like more talks.
Introductory remarks. I think this is the biggie day. All right. Anyway, great. I don't know what else. I don't want to.
Okay. Well, yeah. I just wanted to look at the papers. I don't think we're going to go through too much of this, but I just wanted to go back. So this is the Big Five theory. We were talking about these papers earlier, and Jesse missed that. But these are the papers that we talked about: the cybernetic Big Five theory, and then an activist Big Five theory paper. So we went through these before. These are in our folder, so I can share them in the Slack for people. And again, this goes through a lot of the Big Five theory personality and an activist point of view. And I think this is an interesting approach. We should talk about this more, but maybe not this week. And it just kind of, there's a lot there. It's very dense work, but it's very interesting.
It may tie in a little bit to what I said earlier about the different layers of stuff and how there's diversity at the top end and so on. Personality, neuroscience, stuff. Anyway.
I think that's good. I think I got the sense that there was a lot of there were a lot of ties to embodiment and affordances. Like in one of the papers, they talk about grasping the environment or something. So that's that's and then the representations part I think is also something they don't talk about too much in the papers, but it's something maybe we can tie in.
I think that's just to highlight that one thing. I think that's what's hard and very, very poorly demarcated is that there are tremendous differences in some aspects of mental, emotional, and even sensory affordances. Like in the most basic, very obvious sense. Some people are extremely clumsy and do not trust their sensory motor navigation skills, either in a direct sense of navigating a normal room or driving. So they'll love to drive. And those are obvious differences. But I think the cool, how to study those fundamental things is why is it that somebody has a lot more confidence and familiarity, with a certain, why are some affordances basically much more robust in terms of what they can do and feel comfortable in doing. And it's the same human being. It's not, other very clear differences that affect like in a neurobiological and anatomical sense that are manifest from these things, or is it purely a software thing in the mind? Who knows?
Right. Yeah, and they kind of get into that in this paper with some of the things that they talk about here. So yeah, this is definitely again something to get into. So that's that set of papers. And then there's this other, I think I'm going to talk about this one other thing, and this is tied, I think, more to data science. This is from the Unity blog, which is a software for building three-dimensional objects. And so this is a blog post on getting started with 3D content for synthetic data. And so this is where they talk about using synthetic data to build libraries of three-dimensional objects instead of like actual data. So we're used to, in AI, we're used to building things from actual data. We train models with data from the environment. They could be pictures, they could be like, ray tracing something and then putting the data into the model. So we're interested in realism with respect to training. But suppose you trained a model not with realistic images or realistic data, but with synthetic data. And that could be like, I could draw a cartoon character or a character of a face, and I could plug it into my model. And I could train the model on the synthetic data. So it's not based on necessarily the real world. It's based on the synthetic data set that I create. And it's similar maybe to the real world. It might not be at all similar to the real world. But it's something that I'm using as training data. And then maybe it's close enough to the real world to actually make some very accurate predictions about the real world. Or maybe I just want to create something that's never been created before. So, these are things that come out of the film and video game industries. They're developing new techniques for content creation. They want to build repositories of content. They have these available, so much of these are already perfect for synthetic data set creation. So this post introduces the best ways to source 3D content. So you have these online 3D assets in the Unity asset store. I mean, they're making a sale for their asset store, but you can get these from different repositories around the web. And there are things like cartoon characters or other types of texture variations that aren't really like things in the real world. They're created content for movies or for video games, or even just, you could draw them out. So online assets are a great source of data when the task requires detecting broad classes of object. So if I want to detect a chair or a cat, I want to have real world information about that, but I also want to have a very broad sense of the class. I don't just want to know, like, say, like a chair that you might have in your living room. I want to know if it's a chair that people just sit on. If it's just like something, like it could be like a stool from, some group in the Caribbean in pre-Columbian times, where they would have these ritual chairs, these ritual benches that they'd sit on, and they're chairs, they're benches, but you wouldn't know that if you just trained your model on chairs from your living room. So those are the kinds of broad classes that you want. The same thing with a cat. There are different breeds of cat. If you train it on only a couple breeds of cat, if you do a very broad search on cats, you wouldn't be able to recognize, say, a cartoon cat, like Felix, maybe, or some other famous cat, like Garfield. Their characters are not. So you can train, you can use pseudo-data in this way to like train for these broad classes. It gives you a lot of variations in source materials, different axes. You can define different axes the way you want them, or you can like refine those axes. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility where you may not have the real world data to train with. So they have this synth-det, which is this, so they've created this using a flatbed scanner and 3D modeling and Explorer tutorial here. So they just give you an example of this creation. So you can do 3D scanning through photogrammetry, which is a technique that they use in creating 3D objects. And they give kind of an industrial 3D scanner. They give pros and cons for each of these methods. Then there's procedural content, which is where you have Scanned objects and online 3D assets are generally snapshots of real objects with specific types of things, just specific textures or shapes of, breeds of cat or shapes of things. But another growing form of content called procedural assets uses rule-based algorithms to produce infinite variation. So this is where you have a chair, you're sort of generating new types of chair based on just some rules of what a chair should be. You should be able to sit in it. There's affordances that you use to define a chair. What is sittable? It could be like a bench. It could be like a raised area on the ground. It could be like a bike rack that you sit on. Those sorts of things. You can generate those variations using an algorithm, and then that's all used to train a model. So you just have a very broad category of a chair. So these are procedural assets. They're very useful for but they're pseudo-data. They're not based on real-world images, and so these are all things that you might use to generate to improve your sort of the flexibility of your categories. And so they're selling their sort of Unity perspective on this, but I think this is more generally useful for people interested in 3D modeling. And we even talked about representations in the brain. These things are important for representations because ultimately we're talking about categorization and things like that. And so if we have, we can sort of think about this in terms of synthetic data as an input, so that we can look at say we might want to build a virtual world or a representation. We want to probe the edges of the representation. How far out does it go? What's the difference between a representation free model and a representation rich model? What are the features of objects, of classifications that maybe require more representation, or what constitutes a greater amount of representation, so we can get down to the nitty-gritty on some of those issues and definitions as well. So that's all I have for the papers. Did you have any comments on that, Jesse?
Sorry, I was muted there. No, basically no. But I'm happy to follow up with those papers. I'm going to go back to the ones I missed earlier too. So thank you for sharing them.
No problem. So that's all we have for today. Went over a little bit, but that's okay. So let's next week let's continue with some of these conversations. I think they're very good. Also continue with the technical aspects of the website part, and just kind of getting the calls for involvement together a little bit more. Just make sure that
afterwards, I actually wrote out a description on. I wrote a full description for for a research assistant, basically on that role and responsibility page. I don't know if you saw that yet. But I was going to use it as kind of a foundational thing and go through that. That's sort of like the macro one, and I'm going to have some specific ones when we get. Actually, also, I just checked Twitter and saw someone reach out to me again about the assistant lab manager thing.
Oh, good.
So they're still interested in that, and I don't know when you'd be able to look at them, but I want to kind of. I really want to publish them Sunday or Monday if I can. I don't know if other things to get ready to do in that time, but if I could show you them in the very immediate near future.
Put them in the lab admin channel or DM on Slack, and I can look them over this weekend. So that I'll have time.
All right, I'm gonna start doing that, and that's my main thing because. It's got to be now. I don't want to wait too much longer.
Yeah.
So, but it's there also. I actually feel this has been a really week in terms of the progress on the front end, so people can see things, and we're just putting some descriptions there, and I'm even put them on our site and post them on our LinkedIn thing. I didn't even say this, but I still have to follow up. I'm going to be making most likely Sunday or Monday, I'll be sending an email to a lot of people at UAlbany with a broad update about my life and also a specific update to the undergraduate research people we talk to. So having all of our descriptions and stuff in order for them will be helpful. And we were talking about going to that specific forum to let you all know, hey, these opportunities are open. And there's also talk, I don't know when it is, but there's also talk about, I imagine it'd be me, but someone presenting at like their opportunity fair virtually. So just kind of mentioning that again, but that's my other, that's on the docket, more about that later, and then official stuff with my fellowship is starting next week too. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, a lot of things looking up here.
Yeah, lots going on and a lot of good things. So.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks for attending. Talk to you online this week or see you next week.
All right, thanks to the people who are doing stuff and not here and part of the lab.